Sifa stood outside her family house, barefoot and heartbroken. In her hand was a small old bag, the only thing her parents allowed her to take. Her wedding was just 2 days away, but everything had fallen apart. Her parents had found out that Neo, the man she loved, was just a simple school teacher. He had no land, no car, and no big future, according to them. Her mother's words were sharp and cold. She looked Sifa in the eyes and said, "If you marry that man, you are no longer my daughter." Then she spat at Sifa's feet. The pain stung deep, but Sifa didn't beg. She didn't cry out. She stood there for a few seconds, looked at the house she had grown up in, and then turned away. Her dress was torn from the struggle. Her pockets were empty, and she had no place to go. But her heart was full of something stronger than fear, peace. She knew she had made the right choice. She walked into the night, unsure where she would sleep or what the future held. But one thing was clear. She chose love over status, kindness over pride, peace over pressure. Neo had nothing to offer her but his heart, and that was enough. While the world saw her walking away with nothing, Sifa knew she was carrying everything that truly mattered: self-respect, love, and the courage to follow her own path. Sifa and Neo didn't have much after they got married. They started their life together in a tiny one-room house with a zinc roof. It was old, and the walls had cracks. When it rained, water would drip from the roof in many places. They didn't have money to fix it, so they used bowls, plates, and buckets to catch the leaking water. Sometimes they even had to move the bed just to keep it dry. But still, they smiled, they laughed, they never complained. Every evening, as Sifa cooked their simple meals, sometimes just boiled plantain or gari, Neo would sit beside her and read little poems he wrote. His voice was soft, and his words made her feel like a queen, even though their home was poor. They would talk about their dreams, how one day they'd own a small school or a shop. They didn't know how or when, but they believed. They had nothing fancy, no fridge, no TV, no generator, but their hearts were full of love. Sometimes they'd sit outside on a broken plastic chair, watching the stars. Neo would hold her hand and say, "One day this hand will hold our future." Sifa would smile, feeling safe, even with no money in their pockets. They wore the same clothes many times, but they washed them with care. They didn't go out much, but they never felt bored. Their love made the small room feel like a palace. Then one morning, Sifa felt different. Her body was tired, and she felt lightheaded. She took a small test, and it was positive. She was pregnant. Her eyes filled with tears, and she called Neo. He didn't say a word at first. He just pulled her close, and after a while, he ran outside and danced barefoot in the rain, laughing and shouting, "We're having a baby!" The neighbors peeked from their windows and smiled. That day, the leaking roof didn't matter. The small room didn't feel small anymore. It felt like the world was finally giving them a gift. They were still poor, but they were rich in the things that count: love, hope, and a reason to keep going. They didn't need more. For them, it was enough. It was everything. Sifa's pregnancy was not easy. From the very beginning, her body felt tired. She didn't have proper food or rest. There was no good hospital nearby, and they didn't have the money for regular checkups. But she stayed strong. Neo, who was already working as a school teacher, took up 2 more tutoring jobs just to bring in a little more money. Every evening, he came home with tired eyes but a hopeful smile. Sifa also did her part. Even with her growing belly, she woke up early to fry a kara and sell it by the roadside. Some days it rained. Some days the sun was too hot. But she didn't stop. She stood for hours, her feet swelling and her back aching. Strangers passed her without care, but she kept smiling. She whispered to her baby inside her belly, telling him stories and dreams, asking him to hold on. Neo would rub her feet at night and tell her, "Just a little longer, my love. We're almost there." Then, one cold night, it happened. Her water broke. Neo rushed her to a small hospital. After hours of pain, sweat, and tears, their baby boy arrived. He was tiny, with soft hair and eyes that barely opened. But something was wrong. He wasn't crying like a healthy baby should. The nurses looked worried. They quickly took him away and placed him under a light. His chest was rising and falling too fast. The doctor came out and said the words that broke their hearts. "He needs an incubator. Now." The cost? 150,000 naira. Sifa and Neo looked at each other, shocked. They had only 6,300 naira between them. Neo begged, pleaded, even offered his phone as collateral. But rules were rules. Without the payment, the hospital wouldn't start the treatment. Sifa sat by the window, staring at her son behind the glass. So small, so still, tubes in his nose. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "Please, stay. Just a little longer. Please." Her heart was breaking. After everything they had gone through, after all the sacrifices, the pain, the hope, it felt like they were about to lose the one thing that mattered most. Neo stood in silence, tears running down his face. They had nothing left to sell, no family to call, no one to help. All they could do was pray that a miracle would come before it was too late. Just when Sefa and Neo were about to give up, something strange happened. They were sitting on the cold hospital bench, holding hands, both of them tired, scared, and full of silent tears. The doctor had already told them they needed to pay 150,000 naira for their baby to use the incubator, but they didn't have it. They had only 6,300 naira. There was nothing more they could do. Sifa looked at her baby behind the glass window, so tiny and still, and her heart broke into pieces. Then suddenly, a nurse came running down the hallway. Her voice was loud and full of surprise. She said, "The bill has been paid." Sifa didn't understand at first. She thought she heard wrong. "What did you say?" she asked. The nurse repeated, "The full bill has been paid. Your baby can now use the incubator." Sifa jumped to her feet, confused and shocked. Who paid? How? She followed the nurse's finger and looked through the small glass window near the cashier's desk. There, she saw a man in a neat brown suit. He was handing a big envelope to the cashier. She didn't know him. He looked calm, almost like he had done this many times before. She ran down the hallway to catch him. She wanted to say, "Thank you." She wanted to ask who he was and why he helped them. But by the time she reached the door, he was gone. No car, no name, nothing. He had disappeared. The only thing he left behind was a receipt and a small handwritten note. It said, "Some babies must live, and so must their mothers." Safa stood there holding the note in her shaking hands. Her eyes filled with tears. She read the words again and again. She didn't understand who this man was or why he helped them, but she knew one thing. Her baby now had a chance to live. She walked back to Neo, still holding the note. They hugged tightly, crying together. It didn't make sense, but it didn't have to. Their baby would now get the help he needed, and somehow, somewhere, someone had cared enough to save them. From that moment, Sifa began to believe that even in the darkest times, miracles could happen. Even when you feel forgotten, help can come from a stranger with no face, no name, just a heart full of kindness. 1 year later, Sifa and Neo were full of joy. Their baby boy, whom they once thought they might lose, was now healthy, smiling, and learning how to walk. They decided to hold a small baby dedication to thank God and celebrate his life. It wasn't anything big, just a simple event with a few neighbors, some jollof rice, drinks, and a borrowed speaker playing soft music in the background. They had no money for decorations or fancy clothes, but their hearts were full. Neo had an idea, something he didn't tell Sifa about at first. He remembered the man who saved their baby by paying the hospital bill, that stranger who disappeared without a word. Neo had always wondered who he was. So quietly, he wrote a letter to the hospital. He didn't expect much, just wanted to say thank you in case the man ever came back, or if someone knew who he was. Neo told them about the baby dedication and said, "If this message ever reaches him, please tell him we would be honored if he came." He didn't say anything to Sefa because he didn't want to get her hopes up. They both believed that man had probably gone far away, and they might never meet him again. Still, Neo hoped the letter might find its way somehow. The day of the baby dedication came. Their small compound was filled with laughter. Children ran around, women helped serve food, and Sefa dressed their baby in a white outfit with a small cap. Her eyes were glowing with happiness. It was a day she would always remember. Then, just as the music was playing, and Neo was about to give a short speech, a long black car slowly drove up and parked in front of their gate. Everyone turned to look. The music stopped. Even the children became quiet. It wasn't the kind of car anyone from their street owned. The door of the car opened. Sifa held her baby tighter, confused and nervous. Neo walked slowly toward the gate. His heart was beating fast. He didn't know what to expect. Then a man stepped out. It was the same man from the hospital, the one in the brown suit. He was still dressed neatly, still calm, and still had that same quiet look on his face. Neo's mouth dropped open. Sifa gasped. Everyone was silent, watching this stranger walk in. They never thought he would come, but he did, and everything was about to change. The man who stepped out of the long black car looked just like the stranger Sifa saw at the hospital that night, calm, kind, and dressed in a neat brown suit. But now he looked even more graceful. His presence made everyone stop and stare. He wasn't someone from their neighborhood, that was clear. He looked like someone important, yet peaceful. His steps were soft, but his presence was strong. Sifa held her baby closer, her heart beating faster, her eyes filled with tears as she whispered to Neo, "It's him." Neo nodded slowly, too surprised to speak. The man walked toward them, his eyes fixed gently on the baby in Sifa's arms. When he reached them, he gave a small smile and said in a calm voice, "My name is Mr. Barima. I came to see the boy who reminded me what purpose feels like." Everyone around went quiet. The music had stopped. The laughter had faded. All eyes were on this man. Children peeked from behind their parents. Neighbors looked at one another with confused faces. Some were asking in low voices, "Who is he? Is he the baby's grandfather? Is he a politician?" But Sifa couldn't speak. She just looked at him, remembering how she saw him through the hospital window, handing over the money that saved her baby's life. Back then, she had no strength to ask questions. She only knew that someone, a stranger, had shown them mercy. Now, he was standing right in front of her, and still, he wasn't acting proud or loud. He was calm, just like that day. Neo finally found his voice and said, "Thank you, sir. You saved our son. We never thought we'd see you again." Mr. Barima nodded. "I wasn't sure I would come, but something inside me said I needed to." That child. He looked at the boy in Sifa's arm, who was now trying to grab his tie. "That child gave me something I didn't know I had lost." Sifa didn't understand what he meant. "What did he give you, sir?" she asked softly. He paused. Then he said, "Hope, a reason to keep going. I lost my wife and daughter 3 years ago. I had money, I had power, but I had no peace. That night at the hospital, when I saw your pain, I felt human again." Sifa covered her mouth with her hand, tears falling freely now. Neo looked down, trying to stay strong. Mr. Barima smiled gently and added, "That baby reminded me that even in suffering, there is beauty, there is life." Nobody could say a word. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. Everyone was sitting under the small canopy. There was soft music playing, children laughing, and neighbors chatting over plates of rice and drinks. But when Mr. Barima stood up and took the microphone, everything suddenly went quiet. The air changed. Even the babies stopped crying, as if they knew something big was about to happen. Mr. Barima stood tall, but there was a deep look in his eyes. He didn't smile. He looked around at the people, then at Sifa and Neo, and then down at the little boy who had just turned 1. He took a deep breath and said, "This child saved me." People looked at one another confused. What did he mean? How could a baby save a grown man? Mr. Barima continued, his voice calm but heavy. "1 year ago, I was driving to the bridge. I had made a decision. I was going to end my life. I felt empty. My wife and daughter had died, and I had nothing left inside me." Gasps filled the air. A few hands covered mouths. Nobody expected to hear that. He paused, took a shaky breath, and then said, "But on the way, I stopped by the hospital. I don't know why. I just felt a pull. And when I got there, I saw 2 young parents crying, holding hands, praying over their tiny baby boy who was fighting to breathe. You didn't have money, but you had faith. You had love." He looked at Sifa, then Neo. Both of them were now holding hands, their eyes wide and wet. "In that moment," he said, "something inside me broke, but in a good way. I remembered what love looks like. I remembered what it feels like to care for someone." People were wiping their eyes. The place was silent except for Mr. Barima's voice. He turned to Sifa and Neo, looked at them with gentle eyes and said, "You gave me a reason to live. That day I walked away from the bridge. I started to breathe again. And now, if you'll let me," he paused, his voice soft but sure, "let me help you live better." There were no words. Sifa couldn't speak. Neo just nodded slowly. The whole crowd was frozen in their seats, touched in a way they couldn't explain. One child had saved a stranger, and now that stranger had returned, not just to say thank you, but to change their lives forever. Mr. Barima didn't just say kind words and leave. He came back the next day with action, real action. Not loud, not for show, but powerful. First, he opened a trust fund for their baby boy, a special account that would grow with time. Money for his future, for school, for dreams. Sifa couldn't stop crying. She had never imagined her son would have that kind of opportunity. Then, Mr. Barima handed Sifa the keys to a new shop. But this wasn't just any shop. It was a fully stocked food store. Bags of rice, oil, spices, beans, and shelves full of items ready to sell. Her days of selling akara on the roadside under the hot sun were over. Now, she had a proper place, a business, a fresh start. For Neo, Mr. Barima did something just as thoughtful. He hired him to run a new foundation for underprivileged students. Neo's face lit up like the morning sun. After all his years of teaching with little pay, now he could help more children, and be paid well for it too. He finally felt seen, respected. The news spread like fire across the neighborhood. The same people who once mocked Sefa for leaving her parents and marrying a poor teacher, the same ones who whispered when they lived in a leaking room, now stood speechless. They came to see the new store, to shake Neo's hand, to ask about the man in the suit. But what truly shocked them wasn't the money or the gifts. It was the way grace seemed to follow this couple. They had suffered, they had stayed kind, and now they were being lifted. It wasn't about riches, it was about reward. It wasn't about luck, it was about faith. And even though Sifa still remembered the night she left home in a torn dress, today she stood tall in front of her store, not just proud, but thankful. Because from rice bags to real estate, her story had changed. And not because she chased wealth, but because she chose love, peace, and dignity. And grace followed. Her story, once filled with tears and prayers, had become a story that would inspire others forever. After everything changed for Sefa and Neo, word spread fast. The news of the shop, the trust fund, and their rising success reached even the people who had once pushed her away. It wasn't long before her phone rang. It was her mother. Her voice sounded soft, almost sweet, so different from the night she had shouted and spat at Sefa for loving a poor man. "You've always been special, my daughter," she said. "We were just trying to protect you." But Sefa stood still. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just listened in silence. Her heart didn't feel warm or angry. It just felt free. Soon after, her siblings started sending her photos, childhood pictures, family moments, long messages filled with, "We miss you," and "We're proud of you." But Sefa didn't reply, not because she hated them, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had learned something powerful. Real family isn't always the one you were born into. Sometimes it's the one you build with love, with tears, with faith. Neo, their baby boy, and the small circle of people who stood by them when they had nothing. That was her real home now. She thought back to the night she left, barefoot and broken, in a torn dress. How hard it had been to walk away. But if she hadn't taken that painful step, she would never have reached this peace. Her mother and siblings didn't see her worth when she was struggling. They didn't support her when her back ached from pregnancy and her hands smelled of akara oil. They didn't believe in her when she chose love over money. But now that the light was shining, they wanted to come back. And maybe one day she would open the door and welcome them. Maybe, but not today. Today, her heart was full, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Some people only show love when the world claps for you. But Sefa had found the kind of love that claps even in silence. She had built her own home, brick by brick, pain by pain, joy by joy. A home made of laughter, prayers, and late-night baby cries. And no matter how loud the world outside tried to knock, she knew this truth. Some homes are not inherited, they are created, and hers was finally complete. Sefa never planned to become a public speaker, but her story, filled with pain, strength, and hope, began to touch hearts far beyond her little shop and home. It started with one small women's gathering in her neighborhood. She stood in front of a few plastic chairs, holding her baby, and spoke from her heart. No big words, no fancy clothes, just her truth. "I was kicked out for loving a man who had nothing," she told them, her voice calm but firm. "But I found out something. Poverty is not just about money. It's about a heart that lacks kindness, a mind that has no vision, a life without courage." The room went quiet, and then, one by one, the women began to cry, and clap, and hug her afterward. They said, "You spoke for all of us." Word spread. More groups invited her, bigger rooms, more faces, and everywhere she went, she took her family with her. Neo stood proudly by her side, never ashamed of his simple past. Their son, now a little older, always close, sometimes sleeping in her arms as she spoke. Then one day, at a grand event filled with government officials, business leaders, and women from across the country, Safa walked onto a big stage. The lights were bright, the cameras rolling, and in the front row sat Mr. Barama, the man who once paid her hospital bill in silence. Now he smiled like a proud father. She told her story again, but this time her voice was stronger. More people listened. I was thrown out, she said. I had no roof, no shoes, just love in my heart. And today, I stand before you, not because of what I have, but because of what I didn't give up. People rose to their feet. The applause lasted long after she left the stage. Safa had become more than a mother, more than a wife. She had become a voice for every woman who was told she wasn't enough, a voice for those who were rejected for choosing love over luxury, a voice for the silent fighters. And in the crowd, the billionaire who once saved her watched with tears in his eyes because he realized something. Sometimes, the people you help in secret become the loudest light in the world. And in saving her, he had saved himself too. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll past. Share it with someone who needs hope. Tag a friend who believes in love over money. Comment, "Grace wins," if you believe that no one's beginning should define their ending. Let's remind the world that kindness, vision, and courage are the real riches.